Welcome to learning about relative clauses. This is the fourth video in the series of Grammar with Clarity for Everyone. So in the last lesson, we learned about dependent versus independent clauses. Relative clauses are just simply a type of dependent clause. It's like a subset of a dependent clause, but it still functions exactly the same. So we're going to just go ahead and make one page of notes today. It's going to be a very quick lesson. We're just going to break down what makes something uniquely a relative clause versus a general dependent clause. Okay. All right. Thank you for being here. You need to have a sharpened red pencil and a sharpened pencil, and that's all you, and a sheet of college ruled notebook paper, and that's all you need. Okay, first thing we're going to do, go ahead and put number 4 over here in the top right corner, so that indicates that we are on video lesson 4. At the top, we're also going to write clauses, and if you remember the last lesson that we did, we wrote clauses at the top, and then we wrote dependent versus independent over here. So we're just going to continue with the idea that we're talking about these clauses, but now we're only talking about relative clauses. And because relative clauses are a type of dependent clauses, and we remember we color coded those red, we're going to go ahead and pick up our red colored pencil, and we're going to really heavily bold this red. Now your pencil lead might break. Mine might also, because sharpened colored pencils don't like to do bolding. They like to snap. I made it. It didn't snap on me. Okay. All right. So we've got several things we need to identify here. First of all, a relative clause is a type of dependent clause. So we're going to write that first right here. Okay. And then we're just going to kind of do like a squiggle line into that, a type of dependent clause. So we will use a red to identify it. Let's put a comma here. A relative clause is a type of dependent clause, comma. So, because that's our coordinating conjunction, we will use red to identify it. Okay, and we're going to pick up our red. Do you remember, first we're going to underline type of dependent clause, but do you remember that in the last lesson I was saying we love dependent clauses because what do? They make our writing really interesting. We want to use them. They're good. They're good. They're good. They're good. Okay. Dependent seems to be a word that has a negative connotation, which really means like kind of the emotional feeling you get when you read a word. But do you know what? In writing, it's a good word because we want those. So we're going to add those hearts. This type of clause gives more information about a noun specifically. So we're going to come down a line and we're going to write this next interesting bit of information that helps us identify what a relative clause is. This type of clause gives more information about a noun. Okay. Now we're going to kind of come in and we're going to do a subset of 4 things that are unique about this. Okay, so we're going to come in and subset 1. This is again a note-taking strategy, white space, indenting, breaking things down in number order or bullet points, very helpful. First thing we want to identify, notice that it contains a subject and a predicate, so we know it is a clause. So we're going to write that, notice. But we have to stop and notice it, like we have to put energy into thinking about that, okay? Otherwise, as you'll learn in our next lesson where we talk about phrases versus clauses, we definitely have to figure it out then. We have to stop and think, do we have both a subject and a predicate happening here? If not, it cannot be a clause, it has to be a phrase. So that's why we're going to identify that in this set of notes, even though we're not two phrases yet, okay? So notice that it contains a subject and a predicate. I'm going to just use and, the plus instead of and for shorthand. Comma. So we know that it is a clause. Okay, we're going to double underline we know. Okay, we're going to skip a line now. Again, we don't want to ever cram anybody together when our notes, our eyes don't like to go back and look at things that are squished. Our eyes like to have white space. That's why white space is a big deal when you're taking notes. Even if your teacher doesn't include white space, you should include white space. Okay, the second thing we want to notice that it does not make sense by itself. So notice that's another big, huge indicator that it is a relative clause, that it's dependent on something else to make sense, right? I'm going to skip a line and put number 3. It will answer the questions, what kind, how many, which one. So notice before you write this, notice how I write this, okay? And go ahead and copy me. It will answer the questions. And then below this, I'm going to break these 3 into like even spacing, okay? What kind? Question mark. How many? Question mark. Which one? I'm not going to answer all of these, obviously. I'm going to answer one of them. Now, why was it important that we didn't just squish these together? Well, because we want our eyes to notice this, okay? So we're going to do something unique that makes this stick out. We could underline it, or why don't we just circle them? We haven't done circles yet. What kind? How many? Which one? It's going to answer one of these questions. Remember again that it's a clause that gives more information about a noun. It's going to tell us what kind of noun. Let's talk about let's say our noun is a ball, okay? I just realized that my noun looks like I spelled it N-O-W-N, but I didn't. I just used sloppy handwriting, okay? That's gracious. Sorry about that, guys. Okay. So what kind of ball? How many balls? Which ball? The red one, the blue one? So do you see, it doesn't really matter what our noun is, it's going to answer one of these questions. All right, next, we're going to come down a couple of lines. We're going to do number 4. It will begin with either a, we're almost done, by the way. Either a, and then we're going to come in here and we've got 2 subsets. We have relative pronoun or a relative adverb. So we're going to write either a, and we're going to write relative. See how I went down and indented? Relative pronoun. What is a pronoun? A pronoun, you guys, a pronoun refers to a noun. So if I said, Jenny is so happy she is graduating today, the noun in our sentence is Jenny. She is the pronoun that refers to Jenny. So it's still a noun, but we know it's Jenny. It's she is the pronoun, okay? So we'll begin with either a relative pronoun, one of these relative pronouns, not the word she. A relative pronoun such as who, whom, because she is not a relative pronoun. She is a pronoun, okay? So we're talking about words that are relative pronouns. They're a subset of pronouns, really, okay? Who, whom, whose, that, or which, okay? These are pronouns, but they're a special kind of pronoun. So a relative clause is either going to begin with one of these guys or a relative adverb. Notice how I'm leaving all these spaces. So what are relative adverbs? These are these guys. When, where, why. Okay. So one of these clauses, these relative clauses, will begin with one of these words. So these are really important words, right? How do we identify that these are really important words? Well, first of all, the word begin, I believe, is pretty important in this set of notes. Would you agree? Okay, so we're going to bold begin. Actually, let's go ahead and bold the whole "it will begin" so that just jumps right out at us, okay? It will begin. And then let's put like a squiggle, underline begin. So it just really jumps out. That just kind of looks sloppy to me. Okay. Then we're going to go through and we're going to bold each of these words because they're pretty big deal words. These are the words that really jump out at us from our notes that tell us that we're looking at a relative pronoun. Okay. And if we can just glance at that, we can quickly pick out a relative pronoun. There's no need to be stressed out, confused, upset, which by the way, oh, this is really bad handwriting on my part, which by the way is really common when we're dealing with both math and grammar. I don't know. I do know why, because they're very commonly confused things to learn. It's just confusing for a lot of people. And you know what? You could be a straight A student and you could be in advanced classes and still be completely frustrated and racking your brain around about this stuff. Don't feel bad. You're not different. You're actually more normal than not. Okay, trust me, I have helped so many advanced students with grammar concepts. So I know for a fact the things that I'm commonly teaching them, and everything in this set of 21 lessons is from that list. Okay. So I am now going to do a squiggle, 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 squiggle. Why am I doing a squiggle box? Well, let's think about what that connects to. Why am I not just doing a regular box? Because I did begin with a squiggle, and I know I didn't leave a good white space for that to jump out, okay? But maybe I'll do something else to make it pop out. Here's another note-taking strategy. The thing is, we want things to pop out that are super important so our eyes can quickly jump to them, okay? These words are a big deal when we're picking out a relative pronoun. So we need this to pop out. It will begin. We need to know that. We don't necessarily have to immediately know that it's going to answer these questions. This is good if we're going to take a second, maybe a minute, and look at our notes. But we do need to quickly know these words, right? Okay, now the last thing we're going to do, and then we are done with this lesson, we're going to just have two examples here. Okay, the first example, we're going to come down, leave some white space. I like the house that I live in. Okay, go ahead and write that sentence. All right, so then your question is to identify if there is a relative clause in this sentence. And so you say, okay, well, what am I supposed to do to pick out whether I have a relative clause or not? Well, first of all, I know that clauses contain a subject and a verb, okay? Contains a subject and a predicate. Predicate's the same as a verb. Okay, so I like the house, that's one. That I live in, that's another one. Okay. Does not make sense by itself. I like the house makes sense by itself. That I live in, I could not like read that out loud all by itself. It wouldn't really make sense. Okay, so that's interesting. Now I'm understanding. Okay, this is definitely got a subject and a predicate. It's definitely a clause. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and underline it, and then it doesn't make sense by itself, so I know it's dependent. All right, but is it just a typical dependent clause or is it a relative dependent clause? I think, honestly, I think relative clauses should be called relative dependent clauses. Actually, you know what? Let's do that. Boop. Let's just go ahead and do that, right? Let's just add that to our notes because it's a type of dependent. Okay, so we know it's dependent, but then we want to say, well, it answers the question, what kind, how many, which one? Well, the house, is this answering the question, what kind? Or how many, or which one? It's not answering the question, what kind? It's not answering the question, how many, but it is answering the question, which one? The one that I live in. And guess what else? It starts with the word that, and that's one of our special words. So boom, I just took you through a long, lengthy thought process that honestly, you're probably not going to have to do because you're going to identify really fast. That stands alone, that does not, and that, I shouldn't be using the word that so many times, but that starts with that. Okay, there we go, there's that guy. And let's go ahead and put a squiggle underline the word that it begins with. Also notice there's no comma here separating them because quite often there is not a comma separating dependent clauses and independent clauses. Okay, the next one we're going to do is a little bit lengthier. My daughter, comma, who lives in Japan, comma, is coming home in June. So we're going to come down 2 lines here. Okay, period. Oh boy, what's going on here? So here our relative clause ended our sentence, but that's not always the case. Quite often, a dependent clause, whether it's relative or not, is going to be a situation where we like split an independent clause, we just split it and we insert it in, and that's what's happening here, okay? So how can we tell? Well, let's cover this up and let's read the rest. My daughter is coming home in June. Hey, guys, let's just go ahead and color code that real quick. Actually, let's color code I like the house too, because we probably should have done that. My daughter is coming home in June. Is that an independent clause? Yes, it is. If I throw in something interesting about my daughter, which tells me something about her, maybe which one, I mean, you know, I only have one daughter, but maybe I had more, okay? Maybe it's particularly the daughter who lives in Japan, and so I would need to identify that. But it does start with who, and that's a relative pronoun. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the word who, maybe do a squiggle underline, who lives in Japan. There's something else really important here that we need to identify, guys. When we insert, we split a dependent clause, we split it and we insert something interesting, one of these relative dependent clauses that we love, excuse me, because it gives us that extra information. We have to isolate it with commas. It's also called setting it off with commas. The comma does not attach to this. The comma attaches to this word and then this word. But if you don't have the commas, that would be weird. Let's try reading that without the commas. My daughter who lives in Japan is coming home in June. I mean, yeah, I can see people probably talking like that, but let's read it with the commas. My daughter who lives in Japan is coming home in June. That's so much clearer. So it's important that if we're going to insert a dependent clause of any type into a sentence, into an independent clause, it gets set off with commas. That's a big deal. That will be one of our comma rules that we cover in a future lesson. Okay, so that's everything for this lesson. You're doing great. If you're hanging in there, I'm very, very proud of you. I have, let's see here, I have for this only one IXL example to bring up to show you. And then I will show you, wait, do I have 4? Wait, let's see here. Oh no, I have more than one. I have 2. And then I will show you the exact path in IXL to go to access your practice problems with immediate feedback. All right, so this example is coming from IXL, 8th grade, AA.5. This one has us, it asks us, if you look at the very top, it tells us that we are combining sentences using relative clauses. So make sure you have your notes in front of you, okay? First it says read the sentences, and then it says now combine the sentences by completing the relative clause. So what that tells us is that in this particular example, they're actually providing the relative clause for you, but you have to finish it, which means you have to type in your answer based on the information. So what they're doing here is they're giving you two simple sentences, and they're asking you to combine two simple sentences in a more creative, complex, mature way of writing. So that's what we're practicing here. Okay, and they're going to tell you right away if it's correct or incorrect. So this particular example, I went ahead and typed in the correct answer that you would type in. So the sentences are, Ruben is having his shoulder operated on by Dr. Boyd. I recommended Dr. Boyd. Okay, wouldn't it be much more interesting to say, Ruben is having his shoulder operated on by Dr. Boyd, whom I recommended? It would be, for sure. And then we're blending those two thoughts together, but in a more mature way. Okay, here's our next example. Again, we're combining sentences using relative clauses. So they give us a set of sentences. Ann Curry is a television journalist. In April 2014, she was rescued by Boy Scout Troop 368 when she broke her ankle while hiking in New York's Harriman State Park. I just want to interject something really quick here. One thing I really appreciate about IXL is that they use really interesting information in their practice problems. So they use, like you're learning more things than just whatever you're trying to work through, that you're, whatever grammar component you're working through, or literary device component, or really it doesn't matter, that they pull in really interesting content. So I wouldn't have known that about Ann Curry. Okay, so now they're saying combine the sentences by completing the relative clause. Again, they're starting the relative clause for you. They're making this kind of easy for you. Your task here, if we skip over what I already typed it as the answer, in April 2014, Ann Curry, who blank, comma, was rescued by Boy Scout Troop 368 when she broke her ankle while hiking in New York's Harriman State Park. So we have to say, oh, what bit of information are we missing from these two sentences? Oh, they put in here that she was rescued. They put in here that she broke her ankle. They did not put in here that she's a television journalist. That's what's important to put in here. So in April 2014, Ann Curry, who is a television journalist, notice the comma after Ann Curry, who is a television journalist, comma, was rescued by Boy Scout Troop. Okay, now I want to point something out. At the very end of our notes, we had an example like this. We could literally ignore, okay, let's see if you can see my cursor. We're going to ignore all of this for a minute, okay? I'm going to read this without this part in it. In April 2014, Ann Curry was rescued by Boy Scout Troop 368 when she broke her ankle while hiking in New York's Harriman State Park. That is a complete sentence. That's an independent clause. But this is a case where they said, okay, we're going to split that independent clause and throw in a relative clause. Throw in something extra about Ann Curry. Begin it with one of these words, the word who, which is a relative pronoun. Okay, we're referencing Ann Curry. So that's why this works, but also notice that's why we have to have it isolated with commas or set off with commas. A comma after Ann Curry, and then a comma after journalist. And when we read it, we kind of shift our voice a little bit. So Ann Curry, or in April 2014, Ann Curry, who is a television journalist, was rescued by Boy Scout Troop 368. You see how we kind of shift it when we read it out loud. We just naturally do it. All right. All right, for your IXL practice path, if you are in 7th grade, you're going to use the 8th grade problems, okay? And that's because 7th grade IXL does not have this to practice. I want to point out before I move on here that I have noticed in all of my years of teaching and working with students and looking at so many different types of curriculum that are out there, there's a lot in common for different curriculum, but there is also a lot that is different. And so just because IXL maybe doesn't have this relative pronoun, or excuse me, this relative clause practice in 7th grade, doesn't mean that you can't learn it in 7th grade or that other curriculum doesn't have it in 7th grade. Okay, so don't feel like, well, it's not in mine, so I don't have to do it. No, just use the 8th grade one. Okay, so the 8th grade one has AA.5. If you were in 9th grade, use X6. I should probably put a point here. 10th grade X.6, 11th grade U.6, and 12th grade U.6. Again, let's go ahead and do 10 correct as a minimum. Okay, 15 is better. You guys are doing great. I'm proud of you. Okay, so one more thing I would like to note is that these videos are being published through the YouTube platform, which allows viewers to leave comments. So if you find this to be helpful, let me know. That's fantastic. If there are certain aspects that you would like me to adjust, if there are things you want me to cover that I haven't covered, let me know. I would appreciate that. Just feedback is always helpful. I'm proud of everybody who's sticking through it this far, and you're going to notice a definite increase in your comfort level with writing more mature content, with developing your thoughts in a confident and fluent way. And that's my goal with this. Okay, goodbye, everybody.